Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to this panel session. My name is Callum Sinclair. I'm a technology lawyer with Burness Paul and a part of the leadership group for the Scottish AI Alliance. I'm delighted to introduce this panel session this morning, and I'm very shortly going to hand over to Rachel Curtis. Just before I do, I have to remind you to send questions through the event platform, and that goes for people in the room and people online, please. And I'll just introduce Rachel to take it away with the panel. Rachel Curtis, thank you very much.
Morning. Thank you for joining us for this session on FinTech, AI and open finance. Lots of jargon already. We're definitely in the world of financial services. I've been asked to chair this panel because I'm currently founder and CEO of an emerging FinTech that's using AI and open finance. So hopefully relevant, and I'll talk you through our use case just to give you a bit of background and maybe start some of those questions coming in. And then I'll introduce the panel and we'll get on with those questions. So in terms of my background, my first job was on the counter of a Halifax building society more years ago than I'd care to point out, but it's about 30. And I think my career has been defined by sort of curiosity, wanting to do things differently and sort of solve problems, and that's led to many different roles in the 30 years that I've been doing it. Partly, one of those was also as founder of a challenger bank, founding team of a challenger bank. I do still have a normal job within my repertoire, so I sit as a non-exec director of a building society that's 150 years old, which provides a lovely countenance to the world of an emerging FinTech. It's a very different environment. In terms of the FinTech and what we're doing, it's called Inicio AI, which first lesson, always have something people can pronounce and spell. So failure number one on that one. It's Portuguese for start, and our development team's in Portugal, so there was a reason for it at the start. And what we're doing is using the new breed of conversational AI to deliver a virtual agent platform that guides customers through a detailed affordability assessment. Now, in terms of why we're doing that and the problem that we're solving, it's a B2B solution, B2B platform, and for many types of businesses, having a detailed affordability assessment is really critical and immensely valuable for what organisations need to do and guide in decision making. But that's quite a time-consuming and can be quite an inaccurate and challenging tasks for organisations to do. There are starting to be lots of digital solutions out there, which is great. But, and research varies according to different segments, around 50% of consumers struggle to fill in a digital assessment on their financial position on their own. And when they need help, that's typically given by human advisors over the phone or via live chat, which obviously brings in some challenges in terms of time limits and those kind of issues. It's also very expensive when you've got humans doing that job. If we then switch and look at the consumer side of the challenge, there are situations for some customers where speaking to a human agent is just not the right answer and it's not viable. So, for example, if you look at those that are in debt, there's a real challenge for them. They feel really embarrassed about the fact that they've got into debt, and they feel very judged when they have to go through their detailed expenditure with a human that generally they owe money to that organisation. There's a real mental health impact of that. There were 2.5 million people considered suicide as a result of being in debt during the pandemic. So we know that that barrier that's created by completing that financial assessment and taking that first step is one that we need to solve. So we can get to using conversational AI to create a self-service affordability assessment. We know that's useful. But then how do we make it even easier for the consumer? And that is about bringing in the open banking, open finance as it's becoming now to help fill in some of that form. And that's where we start to make that job quicker, faster, more effective and more accurate. Now, the other thing for us that's becoming clear as we provide this sort of central affordability tool is that we actually need to pull in a lot of other FinTech solutions around that, because the businesses that we're working with, which range from, it's not just financial services, it's also utilities, local and central government, they also need other things solving as part of that process. To illustrate that, what I was going to do was just quickly talk you through what a customer journey might look like and the tools that we pull into that journey just to bring it to life, and then we'll get on to your questions. So, first step, you've got a customer, you need to engage them in the process of giving us all their information, and that's where we use AI and also behavioural science to understand that customer, how they want to be spoken to, and how we get that information out of them. We then go through an ID&V process and verify exactly who they are, and again, lots of fintech and digital tools around that point. We then start to pre-populate, and just to illustrate that the form that's used generally across the UK is 300 fields long. So to gather all of that information, there's a lot of fields that need to be filled in. So we start to pre-populate some of that with open banking currently, but there's some gaps in that, so moving to open finance will really help to solve some of those challenges. We then bring in the conversational AI assistant, and what that does, and I always say she, because our agent is a she, but obviously it can be whatever you want. And what she will do is say things like, oh, you told me you got 3 school-aged kids. What do you spend on their dinners and their uniforms for school? And just start that conversation to get that quality of data out. In terms of quality, we also use lots of underlying sources of data, so credit reference agency information, cost of living data files, to know whether what that customer is telling us feels right. So again, it can prompt there and say things like, well, you said you spend £300 on groceries a month, but have you included your takeaway meals as well? And just again, getting that quality of data. We try and create a positive experience as well. So the other thing we can pull in are tools such as benefits calculators and cost savings tools that would say to the customer, you could actually claim £300 more a month in benefits. Let's get through this form and we'll apply for that for you. And it creates a real positive experience for the customer, an incentive to finish, and additional income for the organisation that is trying to collect sort of income from them. It can then look out for vulnerabilities, which is something with the advent of Consumer Duty and lots of stuff happening for vulnerable customers. It can check existing records that might be held elsewhere, or also do really clever things like we work with one partner that can go out and check GP records. So if this is a water company, for example, and what they need to know is if this person should be on a social tariff, GP records can verify that that person is on dialysis, has a huge need for water, and therefore should have a cheaper water bill. So quite clever, the things it will pull in. It then captures absolutely everything within that conversation and date and timestamps it. So from a compliance and regulation perspective, what you've got is a really strong, solid audit trail of what's happened with that customer conversation. And then finally, it will complete the process and offer next steps, which might be referral to debt charities, setting up a payment plan, taking a payment, those kind of things. And again, pulls in that sort of open banking technology and all of those solutions into one place. Where it will go next is the robo-advice type thing, which will then start to replace some of the agent advice where it's sensible to do so. Again, enabling more customers to be helped at the time and place that suits them. So hopefully that brings it to life a little bit with one example of something that's happening in the fintech world. But let's meet our panel today, and I'm just going to get them all to introduce themselves, give you a little bit of their background, and then we'll get into the discussion. So Willie, you're first.
Thank you. So I'm Willie Grubb, and for those who can guess, I'm obviously Scottish, so I will do my best to speak really nice and slowly and properly. But more importantly, I'm based here in Glasgow, work for Virgin Money, so a bank that's headquartered up here but has distribution across the whole of the UK, and look after what we call strategic and advanced analytics. So ranges from use of data all the way through to ML and AI, which will be exciting. So,
hi all, my name's Luke Scanlon. I'm a lawyer based in London. So I work on the technology and data bits of financial services regulation. So for AI, we advise large technology businesses, we advise fintech businesses and financial institutions as well. And then beyond that, all of the data laws around it, the cybersecurity risks and all of those issues.
Hi everyone, I'm David Tracy. I'm Head of Data Science and Data Product at Smart Data Foundry. We are a mission-led not-for-profit organisation, sort of spin out from the University of Edinburgh, and our focus, our missions are based around using financial data for good. Previously, I've worked in insurance, I've worked in gambling at FanDuel, the Scottish unicorn startup. I've worked for a FinTech Scotland member, Castlight Financial, which was then acquired by Experian, and worked in open banking for about 4 years there, and now at Smart Data Foundry. My main kind of interest and what we're really excited about at Smart Data Foundry is how we can use machine learning or other AI methods to generate synthetic data for the purposes of innovation. So how can we help particularly early stage companies get access to the data they need to build the products that they want to build when that's a huge barrier for them to overcome.
Thank you. And you'll see on the slides, Nicola Anderson. Nicola is in the room, hiding at the back, but we will get a microphone to her if anybody has a specific question for Nicola. But I have made her promise she's not going to ask us difficult questions now she's on that side of the room. So thanks to the panel. Reminder, submit your questions online. We'll start looking at those shortly. And if there's a specific member of the panel you want to direct it to, just let me know in your question. Let's get us started, though, with the first one. And I can't talk about AI and conversational AI in my world without referencing ChatGPT, because obviously there's been a real sort of knowledge growth, I think, and acceptance that we might be able to move on from the chatbots that used to really frustrate us on the side of websites that fell over really quickly to something that's a little bit more conversational and a bit more effective. It's certainly helped us when we're trying to explain what we do. We actually now say it's ChatGPT, but filling in a complex form. And everybody goes, oh, right, I get it. So, which is a bit frustrating after 2 years of trying to explain what we do. We've now got a very simple answer. But I thought I'd ask ChatGPT and see if it could chair a panel discussion. And I got some really interesting answers. It gave me some advice on how to chair a discussion. Probably would have said, don't have a cold and a cough. But anyway, here we are. But the first thing I thought I'd ask it, and to get us started, was around, there is a lot of jargon around the topics that we're talking about, and just to make sure we've all got a clear understanding of the themes that are in this thing around AI, FinTech, and open finance, I asked it, could you define AI in FinTech and the emergence of open finance? I got quite a long answer, actually, so I will paraphrase it, but what it said to me was, AI in FinTech is the use of technologies such as machine learning, natural language processing, and predictive analytics. It can be used to automate and optimize various financial processes. Open finance, on the other hand, is the idea of opening up financial services and data to third-party providers through APIs, allowing for greater collaboration. The emergence of open finance has been fueled by the increasing use of AI, which is enabling it to analyse and interpret vast amounts of data that's created by that source. So overall, AI and open finance are two closely related trends that are transforming the financial services industry and are expected to continue to do so in the coming years. An interesting answer, but let's ask our humans what they think of that. Willie, your thoughts. Is it right? Any views?
Lots of views, lots of things were going through my head as you were chatting there. And somebody I was sat in here in the last session and pointed to the word behind me, which was trustworthy, which is a very apt word and a very appropriate word, which is, if you don't have trust of people, everything kind of breaks down. That's trust in your brand, in your systems, but in your processes, and trust in the AI. Are you doing it with the right intentions and the right purpose? So a lot of open banking and open finance is about sharing of data. People are quite precious about data. But equally, you're precious about data. When it gets into financial services in particular, people are actually quite sensitive about it. How many people have a conversation about money? Some people do. There's obviously kind of this guy or lady that runs about and says, I earn this amount of money and I'm mega rich. But most of us don't really talk about what's the value of your mortgage, what's your monthly repayment, what's your interest rate, what fee did you pay? You might, if you're lucky, say which brand you're at. So there's a closed element of that, a shyness to it. And we only want to exchange it when we've got a deep-rooted level of trust. We've got to have that trust in the AI and in the wider system for it to all come through. And that's an important part that I always think we've got to come back to as we think about it within there. So hopefully that fuels a few thoughts, and stick your questions into the app as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the first thoughts are, what an interesting tool that we've now got. So step one, you've asked it a question, and it's given you a level of understanding. It makes you want to ask another question. It makes you want to say, that's just a bit general. Can we look at this a bit more specifically, pick up on some of these points around the data and ask it more questions? So that's really incredible that we have this tool and other tools. But of course, it's then thinking about, as we were saying, we always talk about how trustworthy it is, thinking about what that, where is its answer coming from? What are the sources? Where are these, how is all of this being put together, and then trying to put some frameworks around how useful this really is to us, and how can we make it better, and how can we use it for purposes that can benefit people and businesses.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke. David?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it, honestly. It's incredible how it's just kind of popped into our lives a few months ago from kind of out of nowhere. And I think that's unnerved a lot of people. Like, how did this tool emerge so kind of like fully formed and can write poems to me in a Scottish accent or whatever, you know, if I want it to. And it's stunning. But I think Luke touched on it exactly. It's a tool, and that's what I'm really excited by, its potential. You know, I think that a lot of the, you know, quite kind of like well-founded kind of like concern around it is like, is it going to make my job as a coder or whatever obsolete, or, you know, what does it mean if I'm creative, and, you know, do I need to, you know, what do I need to learn, how do I keep up and compete against this? But for me, I kind of think about, you know, I'm sure anyone that works in product development or engineering's got like, you know, 200 things in their backlog that they'll never get to, and I'm almost kind of thinking, how can it help me get a head start on all the stuff I'd love to do, but just can't get the chance to do, you know? Can it write, you know, some kind of like pseudocode or whatever that just accelerates things, that helps me do those things I've always kind of like thought, oh, that would be nice, but never really got round to? I think, Rachel, it'd be really interesting as a kind of startup founder to get your perspective on this, but I remember being at a startup, you have a job title, but that's not your job. You have every job in the company. You know, you're the marketer, you're the lawyer, you're the compliance officer, you're the boss of risk, you're everything, right? And you're pulled and stretched in so many different directions, and sometimes you don't know where to start. And I think that's where something like, you know, these GPT or large language models could be really, really helpful in just kind of like helping founders, startup innovators, and so on, just kind of I need to write a marketing strategy, but I have no idea how to do it. You know, what can it do to help me do those kind of things, and really kind of free you up to think about like the bigger pictures about where you want to go, and take away a lot of the day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the trust and the risk. And I wanted to start with a positive question, but I am driven into the what are the risks of it, because I ask it questions, it gives me an answer. Do I trust those blindly and just follow it? And actually, I know somebody had an argument with it because they asked it about William Shatner going into space, and ChatGPT said, no, he hasn't, that's Captain Kirk, you're mistaken. But there was a whole debate then where actually William Shatner did go into space on the Elon Musk or something. And then over a robust conversation with ChatGPT says, oh, I'm sorry, you are correct. But only because he knew that did he force that. So there are lots of risks around it. So my next question, I suppose, is what are the opportunities, and then what are the risks? Go, Luke, you look like you're ready.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said risks. So
yeah, that is your job.
What are the risks? Yeah, so I mean, there's different sides, but the most interesting seems to be around accuracy. What can be done so that we don't rely on a tool that we clearly cannot rely on at this stage, and it's so easy to rely on it. And what sort of processes do you put in place to stop people relying on it? The previous panel, we just had a discussion around slow AI and those sort of things. Should we be slowing down innovation, etc.? But you know, within an organisation, you have to think about compliance and what's the rules. And you know, I think on our pre-panel we had that conversation as well. Do you put in organisational restrictions saying, look, you can't use it for your job right now because we can't trust someone who's been doing this job for 6 months to just put in a question, take this information, and how are we going to check whether we were trusting that person to do this job. Now they're just using a tool to do this job. You know, so is it at that level at the moment that we need to put those restrictions in place? There's a lot of work to be done by standards bodies, so the ISO, the IEEE are doing some work at the moment, and you know, and other associations, just to think about that point of accuracy, not to get mixed up with privacy and intellectual property and all the other issues. Think around accuracy and usefulness. I think that's one area.
Yeah, I think if I'd probably just build on that a bit, look, from a banking perspective, there's a lot of context. You know, so you could, I think David touched on, use it for a marketing strategy, which is an absolutely great suggestion. You can get some really good stuff. I've seen write a PE lesson for a primary 3 class coming out of it. But there's a lot of context. There's a lot of semantics about a bank. So you could think about it in the sense of, how should I promote a personal current account? You know, it's a big part of what we do. But a personal current account with Virgin Money is different to a personal current account with Barclays. And does the system understand that, or do you end up with one size fits all, or very nuanced answers that are a bit more, dare I say again, opaque, or take you down a different route that maybe doesn't match your brand expectations or align with the detail and the USPs that you might have. And it also builds into, if you take it away from ChatGPT, we use a variety of different tools in our organisation, and we have the proverbial debates about democratisation of data, citizen data scientists that exist. And these are all elements about how do we share and how do we get more people consuming and thinking about these elements. What you have to think about is risk, because if I suddenly allow every single person in an organisation that's 7,000 wide to build data science models, will they understand the data quality issues, because no data is perfect? Do they understand bias, class imbalance? Might put tools and guardrails around it, but do people read them? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people in here who work in organisations, and you might have data catalogues, you might have data quality registers. Quite often though, when you get a project, what happens? The devs roll their sleeves up, dive head first in, and then go found the data quality issue, and you're like, yes, that's number 275, that's sitting on this list over here somewhere. We have to think about how do we get that design thinking in up front, and we get the right use cases, and we get the right value out at the start, and that will start to take away some of the risks.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think for me, there's the two words that kind of come out of my head are about responsibility and accountability. As I guess human beings, we have these tools that we've invented. We need to use them responsibly and be accountable for the outcomes of using them. I think that the risk is twofold, though. There's also the risk about the human factors. You know, what if you're using these tools to do something like draw up a contract or a marketing strategy or you know, product terms and conditions and so on? It's on you to check, right? It's on you to pay attention to what the outputs are, and it's on you to make that value judgment about whether or not it's appropriate to use the outputs or to modify them in some way. But we all get tired, we all get distracted. There's all stuff going on in our lives that pull us away from being able to focus on things. And I think that's the key thing, is that at the end of the day, the users of the tools have to be accountable, and there needs to be kind of like responsible use of them to make sure that we don't get into awkward or unintended situations with the outputs of these tools.
Okay, lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to start to pick up on some of those, and I think the first one's back to you, David. Do you think open data has delivered on the promises of driving innovation in financial services, and what are the flaws to it?
I'll maybe speak specifically about open banking, because I guess that's why I'd worked. It'd be interesting in your perspective on it, Rachel. So I was working in open banking, I guess, before it was open banking, before the standard came into effect, and we were using tools like screen scraping and so on with full consent, obviously, to get banking data into applications where we could classify what the transactions were. We could make affordability assessments. We could build some models on creditworthiness or potential vulnerability, or any of these things, which are quite interesting to do for all kinds of reasons. And so I think, you know, having seen, you know, what I guess open banking was like in 2017 to what it is now, it's come a long way, absolutely. Has it reached the promise that we thought it would? Well, no, I think is the short answer. I don't think that anyone could kind of like point to one killer application that is like, you know, I must sign up for open banking to do that. Yeah, there's lots of niche stuff about, you know, financial dashboards, account aggregation, you know, some of the things that I'd worked on at Experian, like the credit score boost product and things like that, which have all been successful to some extent, but nothing where you're thinking, I've got 45 million users that are actually desperate in the UK willing to sign up for this. If I think though, maybe, so that's maybe kind of looking at it maybe from a kind of like adoption perspective, but from a technical perspective, it's absolutely like much better than it was. I mean, the days are now gone where you have to write bespoke kind of like screen scraper technology for every single bank, which is set up differently, that you're probably violating their terms and conditions by sharing your password with a third party to inject that into it and so on. So in terms of kind of safety, consumer consumer protection, the purposes to which the data can be used and shared and so on. Yeah, absolutely. It's like much, much better than it was, 5-6 years ago. I think though we're still waiting for that absolute must-have application that really kind of like transforms our lives.
Yeah, and I think the use case we serve, because when we first launched, a lot of people said, oh no, open banking will do that. And when you've got 300 fields on an income and expenditure form, it won't. It gives you a really good start place and can do some of the churn, but actually you still need to apply a human to the end of the process. And we may come back to that theme about what this enables and what humans still need to do. Wooly, I think this one's coming your way. Where do you encounter the most resistance when implementing new technologies in FinTech, and how do you manage this?
It's a good question. There's many different challenges. Sometimes, believe it or not, it's actually ideation can be a big challenge to start with. Because we're doing a bit of work in our organisation just now that we call demystifying data science, because you say the words data science, and we're guilty of it as much as the next person of we use data science, we use AI, we use ML, we talk about predictive analytics. And everybody just looks at you and think, I've got a day job and I've got ChatGPT or I've got the Netflix example in my mind, but what does that mean in an operational area that's processing payments or in a store? So we've got an educational element to get the ideas back. That's definitely a component of it, and we're going to do some good work there. But alongside that, unfortunately, I've got Luke sitting beside me, so I might get a good old Scottish dig in the ribs, as they would say, in a second. But regulation is definitely hard. We, being a bank, heavily regulated. We've got Financial Conduct Authority, Prudential Regulatory Authority, we've got the ICO, and a mountain of other regulations. And Rachel referenced Consumer Duty coming in as well, that we have to adhere to. So we've got a very fine line that we have to navigate our way through. Our process that we have to go through, we call it an ethical data change assessment. So we have to consider not just privacy, but ethical use of data. How can we disclose what we're doing? Does our privacy policy cover it? Has the customer seen the privacy policy? Do we have to cohort people? How do we make sure we don't have discrimination and bias? So there's a lot of work that you've got to do. And I heard our new Chief Operating Officer speaking at an internal event last week, and it was a question about projects in general, so it wasn't distinctly AI, but I think the sentiment still holds true, which is we're all guilty of running into things, and then when a project starts to go awry, generally it's not the delivery phase that's wrong, it's because we didn't scope, we didn't do the right appropriate design thinking up front that set us up for success, because we didn't get purpose and vision and approach right. If we get that right at the start, we've got a much smoother path on the way through.
Luke, you're next, and there's quite a plethora, so I'm going to try and combine them all into some themes, and it's around how do you address privacy issues around open banking. UK government announced this morning their wait-and-see approach to putting a legal framework around AI, ML. How can the law hope to keep up with the massive amount of change, and many questions around that sort of theme.
Okay, so there's a lot there. If we start with the privacy issues around open banking, so I think we've had that. I guess we're talking in an AI context, maybe.
Yeah.
There.
Open banking context, sorry.
Yeah. So in terms of privacy, generally, the interesting thing about all of this is that it is about personal data. It is about access to your transactions, etc. So we have frameworks in place that most of us know that have been in place for a long time. So GDPR compliance obviously needs to be dealt with in the usual ways that you would go about that. Consent needs to be thought about in a way that's real, so that the users are and that's effective. So there's those issues around privacy in terms of ML and ChatGPT and how is that data then going to be used? What's the standards that are being put in place? So differential privacy techniques that are being put in place to deal with those issues need to be thought about. Data poisoning, so there's the cyber risk and all those issues. Those things need to be thought about as well. So there's a range of issues there. If we talk about frameworks for AI, so that's an interesting topic of discussion. So most would be aware. So the EU's taken the lead and started with the AI Act, and we're seeing various versions of that act being put forward. The UK's come up with the 6 principles and taking further steps as well. And we're seeing different approaches taken in different jurisdictions. So again, it's interesting. Do you regulate the technology? Do you regulate the data? Do you regulate the behaviours? What should we be regulating? And so that's still internationally not very clear what we should be doing. The EU went in quick with a product liability type regulation, which straight away was difficult for us in financial services because we're not talking about products as such. So is that an appropriate use case for this? There's been trouble along the way. What they're saying is high risk. There was the first, what is high risk AI versus what is not high risk AI? Is it really thinking about the impact on the individual? So there's a lot of work to be done there. What are you saying cannot be used at all? They're talking about manipulative practices without definitions as to what those practices could be. So coming back to Willie's point, how do you possibly implement that from a marketing perspective as well? So, So I think one interesting thing is that perhaps there is an opportunity to start using AI for regulation, to be thinking through all these problems and to be looking at the different use cases and coming up with more solutions than the general solutions which we get, like the AI Act or like the Consumer Duty, which, when a bank picks up the Consumer Duty, how do they implement that? Yeah. It's very difficult. So there is some opportunity that we can move forward more quickly in a way that benefits businesses by using AI in regulation. So that's just a few thoughts there.
Yeah, we've just seen a good use case of that. So I've just completed the Edinburgh Uni AI Accelerator, and one of the cohort there was using AI to monitor AI in terms of bias and making sure that it's safe. So quite interesting you seeing it in that. David, I'm going to come to you, and it's we're a hub for financial services and a hub for innovation. Oh, it's just dropped up. What's the opportunity for Scotland to take a leadership role here?
Yeah, good question. I think we've got such a long tradition of financial services here, and in particular, you just need to walk around the west side or the centre of Edinburgh, for instance, and you can't miss in 400- and 500-year-old institutions there. I think we've got this really, I guess, kind of like heady cocktail of like old finance here in kind of like the central belt of Scotland, but with that kind of, sort of Scottish tradition of kind of like innovation and entrepreneurship. We like being the underdog, as we saw last night in football, and I really think that there's something in the Scottish culture that really kind of lends itself to that kind of innovative spirit. It's interesting times now with a lot of change in the world as well. We've got Brexit, we've got other kind of like big geopolitical things kind of going on as well, and from all of that, there's opportunity that comes out of that. People moving around, new ideas, new problems, and come up with new solutions need to be made. So yeah, I think Scotland's really well played. I mean, I'll turn the question back to you, Rachel. We were talking outside about kind of like what the support was like for FinTech startups elsewhere in the UK, and you had some really interesting points to make around that.
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously tell from my accent, I'm a little more Midlands based than this side of the border, but I spend a fair majority of my time up here now because I've just been blown away by just the support from FinTech Scotland, being part of the Edinburgh Uni programme, and just how sort of collaborative and the access and how everybody's trying to work together to achieve things. Again, one of the cohort on the Uni Accelerator was from London, and even though everything goes on in London, there it's not as coordinated. So you may have all of the things, but it's not brought together in the same way as up here. So I think you're very lucky, and I see Nicola smiling. I don't know if you want to add to that in terms of answering that question. Let's get Nicola. She's not getting off the hook.
I'm very happy to give a view on that. Thanks for inviting me. I thought the question was really interesting, actually, and let me give you some stats about FinTech innovation in Scotland, which might set the scene a little bit, and why we think we have a leadership opportunity here. So in 2018, when FinTech Scotland was established, there were 26 FinTech entrepreneurs in our community. We deliberately use the word community because it's about learning, it's about sharing, and it's about growing together. As we stand here today, there are 218 businesses within that community, and we can continue to see growth and strength, and we have real strength and real capability in data-driven innovation. And of that 218 businesses, about 40% of those are working with open banking data, moving forward with open finance data. So that gives you a real sense of the groundwork that's already here and the foundations that we're building on. And what we think is really important in FinTech Scotland is to develop that leadership capability, to Rachel's point, is that we build an inclusive cluster. So as we think about our capability across and our expertise across Scotland, the FinTech Scotland cluster brings together the entrepreneurs, that 218 FinTech businesses. It brings together the financial services and professional services organisations, Pinsent Mason, Virgin Money being examples. It brings together the universities and the academic community, University of Strathclyde, University of Edinburgh and others. And it brings together consumer groups and those that we know need to have a voice as we think about the future of FinTech. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the credentials as we think about Scotland and the leadership role that Scotland can play as we take this opportunity forward, and the foundations that we have in place to really build on that. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Nicola. I'd stay close if I were you. I'm sure we'll have another one for you. Whilst we're sort of doing things in the room, I don't know if anybody in the room's got a question. We've still got them coming in online, but yeah, there you go. Chuck your microphone at him, Nicola. Where's she gone? Oh, she's there. I don't know if it'll pick it up online, so they may want to give you something official.
Is that right? Yeah. Coming back to the large language models, or maybe even more abstractly, large free trade models that are doing lots of certain tasks. The thing that makes them large is generally that they use very much quantitative data. And as a result, quite often that data is just data from the web, straight from the web. And these models are released without any kind of evidence of the data provenance. So we've talked a lot about the risks around privacy and accuracy and things like that. But I'm a little concerned that these models are fundamentally built on legally shaky ground. We're already seeing some class action lawsuits against some of the semantic image generation things because they've quite clearly used images that were copyrighted that they shouldn't have. Same thing, evidence is starting to come up with some of these large language models. What happens when if this becomes a bigger problem? You can imagine a scenario where these models have to get pulled overnight, and suddenly the thousands of startups that build a business around ChatGPT are just not allowed to use that anymore. So I'm interested maybe in Luke's legal perspective on that, but maybe also David. I mean, what can we do? Is there an alternative that we can consider for that requirement for large quantities of data, but still maintaining some sort of openness and data provenance?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting. And David would have had a similar experience when using screen scraping technologies before we had open banking. So it's the same set of issues that arise now, and they haven't changed since that time. So when we look at the broad landscape of the laws in this area, in the UK we still have something that's called the Computer Misuse Act, which doesn't allow you to access systems without permission. So if you're scraping data without permission and there are restrictions on that use of data, then you could be breaching that law, which has criminal consequences. And so there's that. There's also contractual requirements. You could be inducing somebody to breach their contract if the contract says you can't take this data from this website because the website will have its terms, which is a contract. We know there's copyright laws. We know there's database laws as well. So there's a whole raft of laws that need to be thought about in this area. So the future is then, so that's the legal framework. Practically, how does this work? And then if that takes us back to the screen scraping days and say practically, well, we've got this new technology that's really making things better. Screen scraping businesses were really making things better, whether it was open banking or it was travel websites, for example. It's made all of our lives better. So we have to move forward. We can't stay with this clunky framework that's restricting innovation. So it's just been that balance between the two. And we're in the middle of that at the moment with this, because we can all see it. We can all say this data needs to come from somewhere. There needs to be processes in place in terms of the provenance of the data. That's what the regulation says. Financial services, there's specific regulations around provenance of the data. So that needs to be complied with. You can't not be doing that. That's what every lawyer, everyone's going to keep telling you that. You can't not do that. But at the same time, you've got to move forward with this innovation. So that's the balance at the moment from our perspective.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really key flaw or risk in the model there about the data lineage, the provenance, the permissions, or the rest of it, and the ethics of it too, right? It's something that I don't think has a really easy answer. I mean, the area that I'm working in just now seeks to maybe solve part of it, the data synthesis. So can we create data sets which resemble real data but cannot be reverse engineered back to any specific kind of data subject or source? But those won't work for every kind of problem. You can't generate the billion words of text or whatever that make enough sense for LLMs to work on. I think that we will have to find ways to work through that. I think that if to Luke's points there, we want to innovate. We want to have these tools. We will become quickly reliant on them. But we do need to balance the rights of the individuals and the data subjects that are part of the training data that are in there. I don't think there's an easy solution. I think data synthesis is one approach that might work. Better regulation, better legal frameworks around it will be another. But yeah, don't have a silver bullet for it. I imagine there's a lot of people maybe scratching their head on this one.
Yeah,
so.
And so at a policy level, so that's still a discussion to be had. So we've had that with open banking, and we've seen innovation and we've seen the results from that, and that has opened up access that just would not have happened in this jurisdiction in Australia where I'm from. It just would never have happened without the regulation. So the question is, whether there's something similar in relation to the data sets. What should there be at a policy level that specifically dealt with? Yeah,
it's really interesting. Thanks.
Any other questions in the room? Yep, at the back.
Hi, thanks very much. This is maybe slightly off topic, but what measures are banks using against fraud? Because obviously ChatGPT is a bit of a gift to scammers and fraudsters, and a lot of the practices you'd educate consumers about around here's how to spot something which is not legitimate, are going to need a major update. So I wondered if that's an area that is being looked at.
That's got you on there, wasn't it, Wally?
I mean, fraud is, in a really strange way, it's fascinating. Just there's so much is probably maybe the wrong term for everybody to take from it, but it's multifaceted. That's probably the best term. You've got romance scams that could happen. You've got just picking up and screen scraping. If you have the screen scraping scenario, who's at risk if that password becomes divulged and then a fraudster accesses the account? You've actually got I'm sure everybody knows about the story from, was it last year? I think Morrison stopped the pay at pump because if it was only taking pre-authorisations for like £1 and everybody was filling up the card and then the payment would bounce. That's an example of a fraud in many ways. So I think it's about, we have to think about that in the round. We have to think about customer experience. I think it's no secret that banks and consumers will experience a number of interventions that are what we would term false positives. So you may get a step-up event or a decline because that is out of character. For example, when I would know this because I work for a bank, but last time I bought a car and I tried to use a card payment for a deposit, guess what? It declined. That's not my character to go to that and spend that amount of money. But actually what you find when you speak to customers and you explain it, there's actually a sense of, you've got my back, you're looking after me. I didn't like the experience, and we have to work on that experience component, but once you understand that's for safety, for security, for protection of your money, that actually is very favourably looked at. And we've got to get the right level of intervention, strip out some of the false positives, make sure we do get the right levels of detection in. And unfortunately, as we all know, scammers, fraudsters are always evolving. They're evolving quicker because they don't have the rules, the frameworks, the legalities that we're sitting here talking about and considering, it's a bit like the Wild West. We all know that we get random phone calls, you get phishing emails, and we get some very, very genuine ones. And we have them in our organisation. They try to attack us, and we work very hard to stay against it. So it's a hugely wide topic, fascinating, and it's just never ends. It's one that's always going to go and constantly evolve.
I'm gonna ask Nicola, because sorry, and she's got rid of the microphone already. Anything to add from what you're seeing in the wider sort of FinTech Scotland cohort and the big banks that you're dealing with for their experience? Come in here in this white line, and then the lovely people on there will see you as well.
Okay. So I think the specific question was around fraud, and I think what I would offer here is that there's a real focus on how technology can help advance that issue. We've seen that in the recent tech sprint that the FCA and the PSR led, and indeed Smart Data Foundry were heavily involved in that. So you can really see the regulators across the UK starting to think about what tools do they have available to them to evolve their thinking, to evolve policy development, and to help really protect consumers. And as they ask themselves those types of questions, they are coming to the likes of these innovators and these banks to, involve them in those questions. And, I think we can take quite a lot of confidence in that, because you've heard that these are very considered individuals, very considered professionals as they think about the evolution of FinTech and how we use data. So that's just one example as to how we bring that to life. This is a topic that's top of mind, and I think we'll see more innovations develop. EY, for example, have an innovation lab happening at the moment that's focused on fraud and financial crime. We will likely do something later in Scotland and later in the year alongside Smart Data Foundry that's focused on this type of activity. So we'll just welcome more contribution.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions in the room? Yeah. Oh, I'm getting excited now. Go on, Nicola, pick a candidate.
Hi, I have a question about fairness and bias. This is a topic that keeps coming up. So every single investor I've spoken to says it's very close to their heart, and it's very important to be fair and unbiased and make sure one doesn't introduce any kind of additional inequalities. But none of them has to date kind of articulated any sort of quantitative target of, we feel this much credit should be given to female customers, black customers, or, this is the margin of error that we will permit ourselves when it comes to, for example, judging affordability, making assessments of customers and so on. So now I understand no single firm wants to kind of come out and make that commitment if it's not an industry-wide thing, and if it could be a competitive advantage for others not to make that commitment. But how do you see, I sometimes feel after having done this for 5-6 years, I sometimes feel we should just stop talking about it, we're not going to do it.
Did I get it as a banker?
I don't know. You can all have a quick go at that one potentially. You all look like you're thinking.
It's one of these. I think it is a great question, and it provokes a lot of thought. I think what you've got to actually get down to is, where is AI and ML actually truly being used within there? There's a lot of, I'm going to say models, very wide sense of the definition there, but maybe they're a bit more deterministic rather than actually predictive in nature, and they might well be, dare I say, good old classic decision trees that are getting used rather than random forests or something a bit more advanced in nature. And organisations are still, as banks are learning, because as I touched on earlier, we've got multiple regulations, so we're aware of it, but I think they are the concerns that we're all still wrestling with and thinking about. If we continue the journey that we want to go on and we believe there's value in, how do we make sure that we do not introduce further bias, unfairness, or anything else that can come into the model? So I'd probably sort of, without saying it, maybe edge it towards how far advanced are many organisations and ones that can have those consequential impacts. That's probably the other point.
I can probably just add around the discussion around the regulatory point. You know, what do you actually have to do in terms of bias and discrimination, and talk about bias metrics? Why not put something specific in place? So if we think from a bank or a fintech's perspective, so what do you actually have to do? You have to treat customers fairly. You have to act in the interests of customers. Fairness, that is a concept in GDPR. So personal data have to be fair. But that's not very specific, is it? So the AI Act, it'll talk about bias. You know, we'll have various acts that'll talk about bias, but that's still not very specific. So how do we get to the next level? So that is interesting. At an international level, you have NIST. So they've come out with their standards. You know, so there's there's parameters in there for the organisation. So it'll be interesting if at that level, those discussions progress, and then we've got more specifics around what do you actually measure. So data representativeness is a concept, everyone's talking about that, but it's not just about how representative the data is. There's a number of other parameters to think about. So it's still a progression, but I think that is the trend is positive, that there will be a list of requirements that will have to be met. And then it's more likely that we'll find consistency across the sector because they'll have to meet all of those requirements.
So I'm thinking about when I worked in insurance, we went through the change in regulation that stopped us pricing differentially by the sex of the driver and the car and so on, and there was a lot of wailing and gnashing and I'm going to go out of business, and no one went out of business because of that, right? Instead the unfairness got placed somewhere else, which was on to primarily, I guess, existing customer versus new customer kind of differential pricing there. I think there's three kind of things that I think about in this, and one, it needs to be solved, right? I think that it's, you know, if we want to live in a fairer world, that has to be done. So on one hand, you've got the inertia of the companies. You know, they've got businesses that work and they know what they've got, but they don't know what they don't have, and they're very afraid to kind of like step out and change their target market or the way that they price or the way that they market and so on, because they just don't know what's going to happen. Then I guess you've got the kind of like the push factors, regulators coming in and saying you can't price differential in insurance by sex of the driver, or and now you have to present new and existing customers with the same price, and so on and so forth. And so the regulators are, I guess, making moves to eliminate or penalise companies for not eliminating those kind of biases, and that's fine, but that only gets you so far. I think the thing that will be truly transformational and really kind of move it is innovation, right? You know, it's good business to not be discriminatory, right? You know, it's simply there is just too much opportunity out there for someone to come along and solve the problem, right? You know, that hasn't happened yet, and there hasn't been that pull factor to get companies into it. But as soon as discrimination or bias or unfairness in models or marketing or pricing or whatever starts hitting the bottom line, then I think we'll see companies really do something about it.
Good timing, because I imagine that round of applause next door suggests that we might need to let you get off to your lunch. So a huge thank you to the panel and for your questions, and Nicola for getting dragged into it anyway. And I think, I was just going to say, in terms of, go on, clap.